Okay, just checking that everybody can hear me. People on the back row are nodding, so that's a good sign, isn't it? So my name's Dharmakarunya, and I'm really delighted to be here this afternoon to talk a little bit about Kukai. And I'd like to also welcome people on YouTube. So welcome to Manchester Buddhist Centre, and welcome to this afternoon. So we're going to start by saluting the shrine. If this is not something that you do on a regular basis, please don't feel that you need to join in. It's fine. Only join in if you'd like to do this. So we'll do it in unison. Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dhammaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Namah, Om. So is there anybody who hasn't been to any of the Refuge Tree sessions so far? One person, okay, yes. Okay, I was going to say that I'm not going to be explaining the Refuge Tree in any detail, okay?
Oh, that's okay. I know it from
Excellent, okay, wonderful, okay. And I'm going to focus particularly this afternoon on one of the Japanese teachers on the tree, called Kukai. And I want to just start by saying a little bit why I offered to lead this session on Kukai. And that's because I think probably ever since I met the Dharma, I've always been quite interested in the Japanese tradition. But I knew absolutely nothing about it, and I probably just had a lot of popular Zen stereotypes in my head, that Japanese Buddhism was Zen, and that was kind of it, really. But I was quite drawn to the austerity of it, and the simplicity of the practice. And so 10 years ago, in 2013, I decided to go to Japan. Can you still hear me? Because I'm realising that I'm slightly moving away from the mic. So in 2013, I decided to go to Japan with a friend. I went to do a work event, and I shamelessly took the opportunity to spend more time in Japan to get a little flavour of the country. And I absolutely, I can't really talk about it in a coherent manner, but I will try. It was such a shock to me on all sorts of different levels. Culturally, it's so very, very different from Western Europe, but also spiritually, it was a very big shock to me as well. And when I came back to the UK, I was only there 2 weeks, I almost felt depressed. Apparently French people who go to Japan, Japanese people who go to France, that's right, Japanese people who go to France go to France and they fall in love with France and they go back and they have a sort of phenomenon called Paris syndrome. Well, I came back to the UK and I had Japan syndrome. So I thought, what am I doing here in the UK? I have to go and live in Japan immediately. But of course, I couldn't do that because I had a job and I sort of had a life here and various other things, not least my friends. And so I didn't do that. But I did go back in 2015. And this time I went with some Sangha friends. I went with my preceptor and I went with a couple of other order members. And I absolutely loved it. And I didn't feel quite so depressed that time when I came home. But I really fell in love. I don't mean in a romantic sense, of course, but I fell in love with Japan in a kind of profound sense in my being. So anyway, on these trips to Japan, I went to a place called Mount Koya. And Mount Koya is a sacred mountain in Japan, and it's known as Koya-san. San is you may know, if you speak Japanese, you'll know this, but if you don't, you put san on the ends of names in Japanese as it's like an honorific, a term of respect. So if I was talking to Suryaka, I would say Suryaka-san, because I have respect for Suryaka, and all of you actually. So I just shamelessly pick on Suryaka there. So it's called Mount Koya, but in Japanese it's called Koya-san, because it's seen as a sacred place. And this is going to be very relevant to Kukai, the figure that we're going to be talking about this afternoon, because it was when I went to Mount Koya, or Koya-san, that I first came across Kukai in a sustained way. I'd heard of Kukai very dimly. Oh, yes, Japanese Buddhist. That was kind of it, really. But I didn't know anything else about him. But when I went to Koya-san, and I went there twice in each of those trips, I came into relationship with him much more closely. And began to understand how important he is, not only within Japanese Buddhism, but in Buddhism more generally. Okay, so I have the privilege this afternoon to say a little bit about Kukai and to share it with you. And I'm obviously not going to be showing you my holiday snaps, but I will be showing you just a few, a very small number of photos of Koya-san, just to sort of illustrate it a little bit. So, say a little bit about, I said I wasn't going to say anything about the tree. I will say something about the tree. So the tree is the refuge tree, or the tree of refuge and respect. So we can see it a little bit like a spiritual genealogy or a spiritual family tree, can't we? I think there are 42 different figures on the tree, and all of these figures were chosen as part of our tree, our refuge tree in Triratna, because all of those figures in different ways were chosen as important figures, both in terms of the practices that have come down in Triratna, but also in Buddhism more generally. And on the tree, you'll notice, if my wonderful assistant is going to zoom in, you'll notice that there are 4 Japanese teachers. So if you go up from the Buddha, and there are 2 either side of a kind of arch shape. So we have, firstly, we have a Buddhist teacher with a big stick, who we won't be talking about this afternoon, who's Hakuin. And then next to Hakuin on the left, we have Kukai. And then if we go across, we have Dogen. And then last, we have Shinran. And each of these figures represents very different traditions within Japanese Buddhism. It's interesting, isn't it, when we start to explore different contexts within Buddhism, we realize how complicated it is. I was always amazed to discover there were so many different traditions just within Tibetan Buddhism, and likewise within Japanese Buddhism there are lots of different schools and traditions. So you might wonder why we have Japanese teachers on our refuge tree. Well, Triratna, as you probably already know, is an ecumenical tradition. That is to say that it draws on a range of different teachings with a bid to promote the unity and centrality of going for refuge. And Sangharakshita chose these figures on the refuge tree for all sorts of different reasons, but he had a very deep respect for the Japanese tradition. I obviously didn't attend these, but in 1965, are we still okay sound-wise? Yeah. Good, okay. In 1965, he gave a series of lectures on Zen Buddhism, and these were published in a very slim little volume called The Essence of Zen, which is a very interesting little book if you haven't come across it. So he gave lectures on Zen in the mid-1960s, and I think part of the reason why he chose Zen was because it was the 1960s. You know, everybody was What's the expression Timothy Leary said? Tuning in, turning on, and dropping out. And part of that for some people was discovering the East, capital E, and also discovering, in many cases, Zen Buddhism, often Zen Buddhism. So probably for that reason he was talking about Zen. But he had a lot of respect, as he says in those lectures, for Zen Buddhism, and both the simplicity and the depth of practice. And across his writings, there are discussions of different Japanese traditions. And then, of course, as you may know, some of us have got these round our necks in the shrine room, the kesa, which is actually based on part of the Zen Buddhist monk's robe, the outer robe, I believe, which comes over the left shoulder. And then lastly, one of the earliest rupas, Buddhist rupas that Sangharakshita had, this is my first image, was of this is Amida Buddha. Amida is the Japanese word for Amitabha, who's on our shrine. So there's quite a difference. Actually, it's interesting having the two images side by side. They are, of course, the same figure, but in Japan he's known as Amida Buddha. He's the central figure in Pure Land Buddhism, which is another Japanese tradition. That was a photo that I took on a very beautiful day. And he's known as the Kamakura Buddha because he's in a place called Kamakura, which is on the coast, not too far from Tokyo. So Sangharakshita had, one of the earliest rupas he had was of the Kamakura Buddha, and it's actually on display at Adhisthana, for those of you who know Adhisthana, and you can see it. It's not a very big rupa, but it's one of his personal possessions. So the figure that we're looking at today is Kukai. Thank you. Got a couple of images of Kukai, obviously pre-photography. These are statues of Kukai. And on the tree, he's represented with a Vajra, which is one of these, and a mala, which is a rosary or a sort of ring of prayer beads, okay, which are used to count mantras. And the Vajra, it's often known as the diamond thunderbolt, and it's a symbol in. We often see it in Tibetan Buddhism associated with Padmasambhava, and that's not accidental because Padmasambhava's tradition in Tibet is a Vajrayana tradition, and the tradition that Kukai represents in Japanese Buddhism is also Vajrayana. I'll say a little bit more about that in due course. So the Vajra, or diamond thunderbolt, if you've not come across it, okay, represents, so I often think we look at it as a sort of static object, and it's actually quite a heavy object. Well, this one is quite heavy. But in a sense, that sort of belies its nature because it's almost like a sort of stream of thunderbolt energy, yes? So to hold it up as a static thing doesn't really represent it. But it represents indestructible wisdom, the kind of wisdom that cuts through all delusion. So a little bit of information about Kukai. So Kukai lived in the 8th and 9th centuries. He was born into a noble family. He was very bright and he had a very wide education, and he trained in Chinese classical texts, and his education was encouraged by his uncle, who was a Confucian scholar. He was also a talented poet and a calligrapher, but at a very early age he became very interested in the Buddhist scriptures. So he decided to go forth, as we say in Buddhism, to practice the Dharma. And he went off into the mountains on solitary retreat when he was 20. And going off into the mountains has a long track record in Buddhism. Often Buddhists, well, I'm one of those Buddhists who likes wild places. And going off into the wild, going off into nature, it was something that was something quite easy in Japan because it's a very mountainous place. Well, as you know, it's a series of islands, but the main island, the main island, Honshu, is a very mountainous place. So he went off into the mountains and he led, a very austere life, practicing the Dharma, meditating, and he had quite a few mystical experiences. And at that point, he changed his name to Kukai. So Kukai was not his birth name, but he changed his name to Kukai. And if you look this up, it'll sort of tell you that it means sky and sea. And legend has it that it's meant to be the image that he saw when he stepped out of his cave from solitary retreat. Presumably he stepped out of the cave, reasonably regularly, but he saw this view of sky and sea and decided to change his name. But I was a bit curious about this, so I looked it up. I have a tiny, tiny, tiny knowledge of Japanese. I mean, really tiny, like, 20 words. And I was a bit curious about this, so I looked it up, and kuki actually means air or atmosphere. And I think, because he was practicing the Dharma, I think it has more of a resonance beyond sky and sea. I think his name gestures much more towards the elements and to air, and possibly even to shunyata or nothingness. Okay, the air, the atmosphere, the elements. And certainly this connection with the elements and the mountains would be really important for Kukai throughout his life of practice, as we'll come on to see. So in Japan at this time, so we're talking the 8th and the 9th century, Buddhism was already quite institutionalized. It was a kind of state institution. And so you had kind of state priests who would kind of conduct, big rituals and so forth. But you also had kind of private priests, individual priests, and they were quite often what we call ascetics, or people who live a very simple Dharma life, live very, very simply, and maybe they don't eat much. And we know from the Buddha's life story that in his journey, he had a period of practicing asceticism, which isn't an easy thing to say, of practicing a very simple life, okay, in a view to paring everything back and trying to encounter the true Dharma. But Kukai looked at how Buddhism was practiced in Japan, and he was already quite disillusioned. Remember that he was back from solitary retreat, and one can be quite gung-ho when one comes back from solitary retreat. But to be more serious about that, he wanted to really encounter the true Dharma and practice and teach the true Dharma. And he looked at how that was practiced in Japan, and he thought, this doesn't feel like the true Dharma to me. So he had a chat with his uncle, who was a very supportive figure. And his uncle said, well, you must go and find your own teacher. And at that time in Japan, that meant going to China. And that's because a lot of the Buddhist texts arrived in Japan from China, and they arrived in China from India, okay, and also Tibet. So developing your Dharma practice in Japan at this time probably did mean that you needed to go and study with a teacher in China. So that's what he did. And he was very young, and it was quite daring. And if you've seen any of those Japanese woodblock prints, anybody seen any of those Japanese prints? And they've often got quite stormy seas in them, haven't they? And that's because the seas around Japan are pretty wild, and particularly the journey from Japan to China is also a very wild and dangerous journey. And of course, we're in the 9th century, so we're not talking about sort of luxury, safe, maritime transport. We're talking about rickety boats, that probably let a lot of water in. So it's a very perilous journey, but he did get there, which is good for Japanese Buddhism. And he'd been there for a while, and he came across a teacher called Master Kukai. Master Kukai. And as soon, this teacher was a master in Vajrayana Buddhism, and apparently, again it's legend, we don't quite know, but as soon as he saw Kukai, he said, "It's you." I won't point at anybody in the room because they might think, "Oh, it's you, it's you. You are my successor. It's you, Kukai." So extraordinarily, and again, as legend would have it, he trained under this teacher for just a few months and managed to be initiated very quickly, it has to be said, into this form of esoteric Vajrayana Buddhism. And he was told by his teacher that he had to go back to Japan and set up his own school, set up the Shingon school. Okay, so that is what he did. So I'll say a little bit about Shingon Buddhism in a bit, okay. But he went back to Japan, and he became increasingly known as a Buddhist teacher, and he also became well known at the imperial court. And this was very helpful for him, establishing his monasteries and establishing his school, because he realized that, remember that he'd been on this very life-transforming solitary retreat in the mountains, and he remembered this, and he thought, what I really want to do is I want to establish my monastery, my teaching school, etc. I want to establish it in a remote location, a place that is close, in the mountains, that is close to nature, because he felt that there's this sense of when you're in the wild, when you're close to nature, you're close to the elements, and in many ways, you're, I think in a way, well, I certainly feel, I can only speak for myself, but I feel much closer to the nature of life, and the vitality of life, and the flow of conditions, and closer to the elements. And so for this reason, he asked the emperor, the way that you do, if he could have a piece of land. And he had his eye, a bit of real estate, Japanese real estate now, he had his eye on Mount Koya, so Koya-san that I mentioned at the start, to set up his monastery. And the emperor, being the emperor, said, yes, of course. There was, nobody there apparently, apart from all the beings that already lived there, but he said, yes, of course. So Kukai established his monastery there. So he established a Shingon temple there, a monastery, and he also established a monastery in Kyoto, as well as a school of arts and sciences. And it was the first school in Japan that anybody could attend, okay? So it was universal, free education, okay? Because even though he was a product of an elite education, he wanted this to be available to everybody. So I'll say a little bit about Shingon Buddhism, okay? So Shingon means mantra. Shingon, so mantra, the word mantra, so it's a translation of mantra, okay, which is a Sanskrit word, of course. A mantra means true word, so the true word of the Dharma, yeah? So Shingon means true word Buddhism. so I mentioned earlier, it's one of the very few Vajrayana schools outside of Tibet. So it's a bit difficult to explain what it's all about, but I'm going to have a go. So it's often described as relating to the 3 M's, okay? So the 3 M's are mantra. Anybody guess what any of the others are?
Meditation.
Yes, yes. So mantra, meditation, okay? Anybody, clue is on the shrine. Anybody think?
Mandala.
Yes, okay, yes, so we've got the 3 M's. So it's meditation, mantra, and mandala. So it's often described as the school of 3 M's, probably outside of Japan, I should imagine. In Shingon temples, and if we could have another, that's another, I will go back to that one actually, if we could, yes. So I'm going to show you 2 images now of 2 mandalas. So if you go into a Shingon temple, in every Shingon temple you'll find 2 mandalas. There is this mandala, which is, I actually have a copy on the shrine, which I bought in Koyasan actually. So this mandala is called the Womb World, W-O-M-B, okay, the Womb World. And if we could go to the next one briefly, this is called the Diamond World. So the Womb World and the Diamond World. And if we go back to, you're making you work hard this afternoon. We go back to this one. So both of these mandalas have a Vairochana in them. And that's because Vairochana is the central Buddha in Shingon Buddhism. Both the womb world and the diamond world, in a sense, the womb world is meant to represent compassion, and it figures a very young Vairochana teaching. And then the diamond world is meant to represent wisdom. So we have the 2, huge worlds of wisdom and compassion in these 2 mandalas. So they both represent who is known as Mahavairochana, Great Vairochana. In Japan, he's known as Dainichi, which means great sun. And that's because he's known as Vairochana the Illuminator. So he is the central figure in Shingon Buddhism. And I don't know if we can go back to the Refuge Tree now. Maybe yes, maybe no. Okay, good. Vairochana, you're getting several figures this afternoon. Vairochana is, of course, the central figure in the 5 Buddhas at the top of the Refuge Tree. So he's known as the Illuminator, and if you'd like to know much more about Vairochana than I know, you can perhaps ask Surika at some point. But he represents the wisdom of all wisdoms, and he's often referred to as the cosmic Buddha principle. So going back to Shingon, so Shingon Buddhism advocates that one can attain enlightenment. We can leave it on there for now, yeah, thanks. That one can attain enlightenment in this life. So we have Buddha potential within us. It's already within us. And some of you may recognize that that's quite reminiscent of the Tathagata Garbha school, of the Buddha nature school, yeah? That in a sense our Buddha nature is already latent with us, and it's up to us to practice to fully inhabit that Buddha nature. So for Shingon Buddhism, the entire universe is a reflection of Vairochana. So everything is Vairochana. So everything is sacred. And so from that perspective, one can see that, we can see perhaps why it was so important for for Kukai to establish his monastery in such a beautiful place and in such a natural place, in a place of such natural beauty. And so the practices in Shingon Buddhism, and again, it's an esoteric school, so it's not something that, we can practice by ourselves. It's a school whereby you have to be initiated by a teacher. But the practice is to unite one's mind with Vairochana, so to unite one's mind with the supreme Buddha principle. And this is done by practicing the precepts, by visualization and reciting mantras. And when I went to Koyasan, I stayed in a monastery a couple of times, and we went to a fire ritual at the monastery. Could we show the shrine pictures now? Thank you. I've got a couple of. Sorry, I've deviated, haven't I, from the order, which is very naughty. Yeah, that one and the next one in a minute. So what's quite interesting about Shingon shrines is that the person leading the ceremony sort of is surrounded by the shrine. It's a sort of, I'm not sure what that shape is, but they sort of inhabit the shrine. And that's because quite often there's a fire ritual which is part of puja. Okay, which is called a goma in Japanese. And we saw one of these goma, and it's a purification practice. Perhaps if some of you have been on retreat, maybe on a Padmasambhava retreat or similar, you might have been there when confession practice or whatever has been done, and there's been a fire ritual around that. But the fire ritual is very important in Shingon Buddhism, and importantly, it's conducted indoors, which is probably a bit of a health and safety nightmare, but that's just part of the practice. So yeah, a couple of pictures here. Then that's the door to the shrine there, which was the shrine that I saw the Goma ritual in, and then if we go on to the next, yes, that's indoors. So the monk literally sits on that cushion there, surrounded by it, and then basically sets fire to what's in front of him. So just saying a few more things before we stop. So Kukai died in 835. On Mount Koya, and in Japan he's not known as Kukai, he's known as Kobodeshi, which is roughly equivalent to the great teacher who spread the Dharma, Kobodeshi. So, I'm sorry, could we go back to one of the images, the one with the hat, that's it. So here's a statue of Kukai, and he's often represented with this conical hat and staff on, carrying a staff. And that's because one of the things he's also associated with in Japan is pilgrimage. So there's a very famous pilgrimage that you can do in Japan on Honshu, the main island, which is called the 88 Temple Pilgrimage. So it's obviously visiting 88 temples, and the ultimate destination of that pilgrimage is Koyasan, okay? And it is a very remarkable place, Koyasan. So I visited here twice, and if we could go on to the cemetery photographs, no, thank you. And it's an extraordinary place because it's a bit like an Indiana Jones journey to get there. You start off taking the Japanese bullet train, then you go onto a local train, then you get a bus, and then you go onto a rack railway up the mountain. So it is quite difficult to get to. And the rack railway, it seems to, I don't know the engineering of rack railways at all, but it seems to sort of going quite a, circuitous journey. And it's a bit like going up to another realm. It's very, very magical. And when you get there, all there is at the top of the mountain are 117 monasteries and a very, very big cemetery. And it's quite an extraordinary place to visit. Now, I mentioned earlier that Kukai died in 835, and he is absolutely revered in Japan and considered almost like a Buddhist saint. And it is believed by Shingon practitioners that he didn't die in 835, and that instead he's in a state of perpetual samadhi or absorbed meditation. And he is apparently awaiting the arrival of the future Buddha, Maitreya. Now, if this seems a little bit strange to you, I think if it does, and I suppose it does, but I think it's kind of interesting because to a sort of scientific materialist perspective, you think, oh, no, that's not possible. We have medical people here. He will have died. But of course, if you jettison that perspective, from a certain point of view, anything could be happening. So you can't actually see Kukai. And I certainly couldn't have done because I wasn't a Shingon practitioner. But every day at certain hours, the monks take him sustenance. So they take him food and water. So there's a whole ritual several times a day around that. And if we could show the big bell. Thank you. So this is the largest bell on Koyasan. And it is sounded several times a day when this ritual happens. And it's also sounded, we won't have heard it because we're in the UK, but it will have been sounded 108 times on New Year as well, when the Japanese New Year was coming in. So you're not allowed, of course, to see Kukai, but you are allowed to meditate in the same building where he is, which I did do, and it's difficult to know, isn't it? One can tell oneself all sorts of stories about these things, but it was an amazing experience to visit Koyasan overall, and I have to say that is the largest cemetery I have ever visited, and it's a Buddhist cemetery, of course, so it's particularly powerful. Some people visit it at night. I wasn't brave enough to do that, but some people do, and they go and meditate at night in the cemetery. Yes, so I'm going to finish now by reading one of Kukai's letters, which some of you will know, maybe not many of you, but some of you will know. And then we're going to go into some groups, and I'm going to suggest what we do after I've read the letter, okay? So I'm going to read this letter from Kukai, which is called To a Nobleman in Kyoto. So Kyoto at the time, Japan has had a number of different capital cities, and at the time of Kukai's life, Kyoto, which is the second largest city on Honshu, the main island, was the capital of Japan, okay? And it is an extraordinary place to visit if you've not been to Japan. So this is called To a Nobleman in Kyoto. So, a bit of background. The nobleman had obviously written to Kukai and said, why don't you come back to the city? What are you doing up that mountain? And this was his reply. You ask me why I entered the mountain deep and cold. Awesome, surrounded by steep peaks and grotesque rocks. A place that is painful to climb and difficult to descend, wherein reside the gods of the mountain and the spirits of trees. Have you not seen? Oh, have you not seen the peach and plum blossoms in the royal garden? They must be in full bloom, pink and fragrant. Now opening in the April showers, now falling in the spring gales, flying high and low. All over the garden, the petals scatter. Some sprigs may be plucked by the strolling spring maidens, and the flying petals picked by the flittering spring orioles. Have you not seen, oh, have you not seen the water gushing up in the divine spring of the garden? No sooner does it arise than it flows away forever. Thousands of shining lines flow as they come forth, flowing, flowing, flowing into an unfathomable abyss. Turning, whirling again, they flow on forever, and no one knows where they will stop. Have you not seen, oh, have you not seen that billions have lived in China, in Japan? None have been immortal from time immemorial. Ancient sage kings or tyrants, good subjects or bad, fair ladies and homily, who could enjoy eternal youth? Noblemen and lowly alike, without exception, die away. They have all died, reduced to dust and ashes. The singing halls and dancing stages have become the abodes of foxes, transient as dreams, bubbles or lightning, all are perpetual travellers. Have you not seen, oh, have you not seen, this has been man's fate. How can you alone live forever? Thinking of this, my heart always feels torn. You too are like the sun going down behind the western mountains, or a living corpse whose span of life is nearly over. Futile would be my stay in the capital. Away, away, I must go, I must not stay there. Release me, for I shall be master of the great void. A child of Shingon must not stay there. I have never tired of watching the pine trees and the rocks at Mount Koya. The limpid stream of the mountain is the source of my inexhaustible joy. Discard pride in earthly gains. Do not be scorched in the burning house, the triple world. Discipline in the woods alone lets us soon enter the eternal realm. Okay, so we have some time now to break up into some small groups. So I would suggest, I'm not sure how many people are here, but maybe groups of 4 or 5, yeah? So if you would like to assemble yourselves and find a place in the building. So if we have half an hour or so, to about, it's it's coming up to 10 to 3. So if we meet back here at 20 past 3. So what is your mission, as they say on Mission Impossible? This is Mission Possible, hopefully. What I'm going to suggest is, are there any aspects of Kukai's life and practice that you resonate with or inspire you? And I'm going to make some suggestions. So the suggestions could be, or at least selfishly, these are the things that inspire me. So they might not inspire you, but it'll be interesting to talk about it. So firstly, the need to renounce the world. What I mean by the world is the worldly world, yes. So the need to renounce the worldly world at times, first one. Second one is devotion to practice. If you consider yourself to have a Buddhist practice, which may or may not be the case for everybody in the room, what does that mean, the devotion to practice? What does it look like? Third one, reverence for nature, and how that relates to practice. And then the importance of meditation or mantra, one more, no, two more. Cultivating connections with the Buddha and Buddhist figures. That's very much the terrain of what we're doing over these weeks with Refuge Tree. And lastly, one thing that Kukai did, as many teachers have done on the Refuge Tree, including Sangharakshita, are setting up conditions for other people to practice. So that's the last one. So I'll read them through again, but obviously, they're just suggestions, so make up your own if they don't resonate. So the need to renounce the worldly world, devotion to practice, reverence for nature, the importance of meditation mantra, cultivating connections with the Buddha or Buddhist figures, and setting up conditions for others to practice. Okay, so meet you back here at 3:20, and then we'll be doing something completely different. Okay. What we're going to be doing now is a threefold puja, and obviously there's no obligation whatsoever to partake or participate in this, so it's offered, and do feel free to participate as you wish. So we'll be doing a threefold puja. After the first stage, Surika is going to lead us in the Vairochana mantra. And then at the end, I'll read the letter again to a nobleman in Kyoto. You'll be pleased to know that we won't be setting fire to the shrine room. Just a little. Yeah, there's a little fire. 2 little fires, 4 little fires on the shrine. Yes, okay. So let's just take a few minutes to settle ourselves. And then I'll ring the bell to begin. The threefold puja. Opening reverence in call and response. We reverence the Buddha, the perfectly enlightened one, the shower of the way. We reverence the Dharma, the teaching of the Buddha, which leads from darkness to light. We reverence the Sangha, the fellowship of the Buddha's disciples, that inspires and guides. Om Varochana Om. Om Varochana. Om Varochana Om. Om Varochana. Om Varochana Om. Om Varochana. Om Varochana. Om Varochana. Om Varochana. Om Varochana. Om Varochana. Om Varochana.
Varuchana, Om 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 Varuchana, Vairochana. Om 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 Vairochana.
Reverence to the three jewels. We reverence the Buddha. And aspire to follow him. The Buddha was born as we are born. What the Buddha overcame, we too can overcome. What the Buddha attained, we too can attain. We reverence the Dharma and aspire to follow it. With body, speech, and mind until the end. The truth in all its aspects. The path in all its stages. We aspire to study, practice, realize. We reverence the Sangha and aspire to follow it. The fellowship of those who tread the way. As one by one we make our own commitment. An ever widening circle the Sangha grows. Offerings to the Buddha. Reverencing the Buddha. We offer flowers. Flowers that today are fresh and sweetly blooming. Flowers that tomorrow are faded and fallen. Our bodies too, like flowers, will pass away. Reverencing the Buddha. We offer candles. To him who is the light, we offer light. From his greater lamp, a lesser lamp we light within us. The lamp of Bodhi, shining within our hearts. Reverencing the Buddha. We offer incense. Incense whose fragrance pervades the air. The fragrance of the perfect life. Sweeter than incense. Spreads in all directions throughout the world. You ask me why I entered the mountain deep and cold. Awesome, surrounded by steep peaks and grotesque rocks. A place that is painful to climb and difficult to descend. Wherein reside the gods of the mountain and the spirits of trees. Have you not seen? Oh, have you not seen the peach and plum blossoms in the royal garden? They must be in full bloom, pink and fragrant, now opening in April showers, now falling in spring gales. Flying high and low, all over the garden the petals scatter. Some sprigs may be plucked by the strolling spring maidens, and the flying petals picked by the flittering spring orioles. Have you not seen, oh, have you not seen the water gushing up in the divine spring of the garden? No sooner does it arise than it flows away forever. Thousands of shining lines flow as they come forth, flowing, 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 into an unfathomable abyss. Turning, whirling again, they flow on forever, and no one knows where they will stop. Have you not seen, oh, have you not seen that billions have lived in China, in Japan? None have been immortal. From time immemorial, ancient sage kings or tyrants, good subjects or bad, fair ladies and homily, who could enjoy eternal youth? Noblemen and lowly alike, without exception, die away. They have all died, reduced to dust and ashes. The singing halls and dancing stages have become the abodes of foxes. Transient as dreams, bubbles, or lightning, all are perpetual travellers. Have you not seen, oh, have you not seen, this has been man's fate? How can you alone live forever? Thinking of this, my heart always feels torn. You too are like the sun going down behind the western mountains, or a living corpse whose span of life is nearly over. Futile would be my stay in the capital. Away, away, I must go. I must not stay there. Release me, for I shall be master of the great void. A child of Shingon must not stay there. I have never tired of watching the pine trees and the rocks at Mount Koya. The limpid stream of the mountain is the source of my inexhaustible joy. Discard pride in earthly gains. Do not be scorched in the burning house, the triple world. Discipline in the woods alone lets us soon enter the eternal realm. thank you very much for coming this afternoon. It's been lovely to share a little bit about Kukai and Shingon and Japan with you. I'm going to hand over now to Surika, who's going to do a trailer for next week.
Well, I just got to thank Dharmakarunya first, I think. Just what a wonderful afternoon. I feel really quite moved, actually. I was thinking, you know, we have this series, so we're trying to open a door into connection with some of these wonderful teachers of enlightenment. So she's opened that door, hasn't she, into Kukai's world. But then what it does, hopefully, is it gives us a chance to open into ourselves. And, well, what has Kukai got to do with me? What was he thinking about? What was he exploring in his life? A search for meaning and truth. And then what does that mean for me here in Manchester? I hope it's opened something up in your own sort of heart and practice, sort of being together with Sangha members exploring this afternoon. So thank you so much for a lovely afternoon. Let's give her a round of applause. Just thinking, if we had a sign-up sheet like, who wants to go to Japan, I think we'd be all like signing up and then, okay, we're going to raise that money in. But anyways, thank you so much. It's been just wonderful. And that, those beautiful words of Kukai to end was great. Just to say, next week, Ratnaguna and friends are going to be opening the door to meeting the Buddha's disciples. Yeah, so people were actually alive alongside the Buddha 2,500 years ago. So we're going to bring those characters to life through a little bit of enactment, so I think it'll be quite a fun week next week. I know Ratnaguna's thinking lots about stories to draw out from about 5 different figures, Buddha's disciples. So do come and do tell your friends. Remember what you said about Kukai was interested in setting up the conditions for people to hear and share the Dharma. So we can all do that by just inviting friends to come along with us on a Saturday afternoon. Why not invite a few pals to come with you next week so we can share the Dharma together more. But thank you all very much for coming. And the other little trailer is connected to the Refuge Tree, which is the 5 figures along the top. We've got Varotara in the middle, so there's these 5 Buddhas. Sangadara and Taralochana are doing a short course starting, I think it's Wednesday the 31st of January in the evening. Robin's supporting that course, so he's giving me the thumbs up. So if you want to particularly explore those figures, that's a little course on Wednesday evenings, which will be, you sign up, so it'll be the same people every week. So again, it's a good way to help create Sangha together. So do book if you're interested in that. I think that's it, but yeah, lovely to see everybody here. Hope you've enjoyed an afternoon of Sangha connection and meeting Kukai, and hopefully opening your own heart a little bit more to your own practice, and go well. Thank you. Thanks to Stephen and Julia.